Innovating education is something that I care deeply about. On my robotics team, I attempt to innovate the ways that students learn about engineering. During the summer, I conducted a research project as part of a program that seeks to change the way in which students learn about computer science. I have even entered a competition whose goal is to drastically change the way in which students learn. I care so much about innovating education that I have even given a speech that was streamed to millions of people about the subject. Something that I also care about is Judaism, and I have worked with people to strengthen Jewish practice in my school community. Thinking about these two passions of mine, I thought, what if I were to explore the ways in which Jewish innovators work in the modern world for modern Jews to innovate Jewish education? I explored 3 different groups over the course of my work. They were Godcast, Wilderness Torah, and The Great Schlep. Godcast is a weekly video podcast that has a video of the current week's Parsha. Sarah Lefton, the founder and creator of Godcast, was interviewed by a classmate of mine. In this interview, she was asked about the intended audience for Godcast. She said, quote, "Any person would watch these films, be entertained, and learn something about Judaism. The audience would be teenagers and up. I imagine the films screened at festivals and streaming online. It's become much more family and school focused as a result of how the content has changed and where our funding comes from. To me, this seems like good news. It seems like she is changing the way that people learn about the Torah portion by having them learn about it in a modern media video rather than the archaic method of reading about it. The thing that struck me most about what she said is that she talked about how she had originally intended it for students, but how over time it became much more popular than that, and how she is using Godcast to educate the entire Jewish population about the Parsha. To me, it was very neat to learn about someone who is taking something that is traditionally taught with reading and memorization and using video to teach people about the same content, but in a way that is much more relevant to them and that they will find much more convenient. Following the theme of innovating Torah study, the next group that I looked at was Wilderness Torah. Wilderness Torah does what it sounds like it would do. They take people out into nature and teach them about Torah and Judaism. Wilderness Torah creates a program that centers around experience such as spending Sukkot on a farm, Passover in the desert, Shavuot in the mountains, and Tu B'Shvat in the redwoods. What was interesting to me is that all of their main events are about Jewish holidays that center around nature, and that their events take place in locations that have to do with the holidays. This is cool to me because traditionally, when I think of Sukkot, I think of going to shul and eating outside. I pretty much never think of how it's a harvest festival. However, if I was on a farm during the holiday, things would be different. In fact, I do not often ever think about the nature connection to Judaism. However, as one of Wilderness Torah's founders talks about, Wilderness Torah is about celebrating the earth-based traditions of Judaism to nourish the connections between self, community, earth, and spirit. Going into nature and teaching about Judaism seems very innovative to me. But what about the older population that cannot make these trips? The Great Schlep was a website that asked Jewish young people to travel to Florida and to guilt their Jewish grandparents into voting for Obama. Surprisingly, there were actually a few hundred people who went to Florida as part of this group and talked to their grandparents. I emailed the creator of the movement, a far-left organization called JewVote, with questions about the Great Schlep. Not surprisingly, this far-leftist group did not want to talk to me. However, I still learned a bit about them. By having the grandchildren of many voters come out to Florida, the voting population was a lot more eager to listen to people from the Obama camp, because what grandmother would not listen to their grandchild? Additionally, the materials that were given to people participating in this encouraged participants to guilt Jewish voters into voting for Obama by talking about Obama's statements on Israel and the Jewish people, but also by omitting things that he said that would put Obama's support into question. Videos, wilderness, guilt, not traditional things when one normally thinks about learning about Torah and Judaism. However, they do represent a way in which modern Jews educate other modern Jews about Torah, culture, and their traditions. And while each of these groups functions somewhat differently, they do all have the common theme of being created by Jews for Jews. They also each have a goal of teaching about Torah and Judaism in order to ensure Jewish continuity. Education about these topics is essential to the survival and continuity of the Jewish people. To me, it's much more important that these things are taught than that they are taught in a traditional way.